Yeah, that sounds good to me. So yeah, who are you? What's your name?
Well, my name's Garett Reppenhagen. I'm a community organizer, an anti-war activist, and a war veteran. So,
All right. And can you tell me about your time in the military? Where were you?
well, I was a sniper in the First Infantry Division. I was a cavalry scout, 19th Delta. I served 9 months in Kosovo on a peacekeeping mission, and 1 year in Iraq.
Okay. Give that a moment to pass. So we talked about this before, but the phrase "white flag warrior." When you hear that, what does that make you think? What is a white flag warrior?
Well, I guess my instincts about white flag warrior is first the idea of surrendering, but really when you dig down deeper about the past and the history of what the white flag means, just the ability to confront somebody in the spirit of negotiation and talking about peace and deconstructing the conflict and trying to get back to a platform of equality is much more often a more courageous move than picking up arms and fighting somebody. And I think that's where the warrior comes from. The warrior comes from the spirit of the courage that it takes to really face your enemy. And especially in Iraq, it was an enemy that I didn't fully understand. Culture, language, or religion that was very different than my own. And I think we battle that here in the streets of America every day. We become polarized and separated from class, race, color of skin. It could be anything. It could be just a police officer against, somebody who's living and dying in the streets every day. And that disconnect of knowing each other is becomes so divisional that it's hard to see eye to eye anymore. And that white flag warrior is a symbol of that courage to really be able to face that person and have the courage to sit down at a table and say, okay, what do we have in common? What fears do we share that we can try to overcome together? And that often is a larger struggle, I think, than actually fighting somebody.
What do you see as the tools of a white flag warrior? What's the weapon of a white flag warrior?
Well, first is that showing somebody the courage, to stand up, even when there's bullets flying or words, negative words being shared, to have the courage to stand up and stop. The second one I think is definitely communication, being able to express yourself, whether it's through music or poetry or just conversation, in a way where you're not disrespecting the person you're trying to meet with. And be able to articulate exactly what it is that's causing you harm. I think it has a lot to do with consciousness and perception about who you are and the state that you're living in as well. And it's a very holistic approach, I think, that the white flag warrior needs to have to really solving problems. And it goes beyond that initial knee-jerk reaction that you have to become violent against your enemy.
I like that a lot. You talked before a little bit about this phrase "martyr" or "murderer" that we use in the song. I guess when you hear that phrase "martyr" or "murderer," what does it make you think of? Is that something you've experienced? Anything you'd like to say about that?
Well, it's the phrase "martyr" and "murderer" touched me heavily because it's something that dwelled in my mind often when I was in Iraq. We're dealing with this foreign culture where this term martyr is no longer really associated with Catholic saints. It's more of something that, an Arab man strapping a bomb to himself and blowing himself up. But if you go down to the Washington Mall and look at the Vietnam Memorial, there's names of martyrs on that wall that have died for a cause that they believed in, whether it was right or wrong. And, and they sacrificed themselves. And the term murderer we associate mostly to somebody sitting in an electric chair that obviously did some harm against some innocent person. And when I was in Iraq, I felt a mixture of both. And every day I had to make a decision which one I was going to be. And I swore to my country and to the men and women I served with, that I would put myself in harm's way to do the right thing, to really, try to create peace and prosperity for somebody else. And my country sent me to Iraq, sometimes perhaps misguided, but with the intentions that we were going to spread democracy, that we were not only going to keep America safe, but we were going to help somebody else in a foreign country that needed help, and I would be sent in harm's way to do that. And to do that job effectively, I had to place myself in a position where I could be killed and wounded all the time, and my friends and fellow soldiers could be the same. And every time a vehicle would roll up, speeding towards my checkpoint, I had to make a decision in that moment. Was I going to be a martyr or a murderer? And that car could have exploded once it reached our barricade, or it could have screeched to a stop, and we could have had a very close call. And, most of the time I would have to tell my soldiers and, convince myself that it was my job to take a risk, that not all these people were bad guys, and I was there for a certain reason. And it was a difficult struggle. Sometimes we took the shot and it ended up being an innocent person, and I was a murderer that day. And the next day we decided to let the car ride up, and we came really close to being martyrs. So it's a difficult decision, and when we look at being white flag warriors, we're making a very conscious decision to possibly put ourselves in harm's way, to be arrested, to be hurt, to be killed, and a struggle for a more peaceful and better future.
That's great. I'm hoping that the sound was all right. Now it's all quiet, so I want to say everything again. Not many people, I think, have had to make some of the decisions that you've had to make. And yet there are a lot of people in very, very different situations that have made similar decisions. This kind of kill or be killed. Am I going to be prey or predator? Fight or flight? Fight or flight is slightly different, but martyr or murderer. As a white flag warrior, which I would say you are, I mean, what do you say now if you're in some of the same situations or similar situations where it really is, where it feels like kill or be killed? Where are you on that now? What would you teach do you have kids?
Yeah, I have a child.
You have a child?
Yeah, I have a daughter.
So let's go to the phrase there's a phrase in the song, we'd rather make our children martyrs than murderers. Is that something you can agree with?
Well,
how do you react to that phrase?
Using violence has to be, one of the most difficult decisions to make in some of the most extreme situations. And still, I can't say that I'm a peaceful enough person to not use violence to stop a threat of somebody that, is going to get hurt that I really truly love. And that's hard. And when you deal in an activist community, you begin to love a lot of people, and they become very close to you. And it's like a unit I was with in Iraq where we were protecting each other. And you're faced often in a situation where you see such great oppression and the lack of social justice that you want to act and you want to use violence because that's sometimes the only thing that you could think could stop it. But very rarely have I seen violence actually stop other violence. It only seems to perpetuate it, and especially when you're dealing with an oppressive force that is much stronger than you and much more organized and has better technology, better weapons, usually to build advocacy on your corner and to reach a critical mass of people who can really affect change. You can only do it through peaceful means, because once you use violence, you alienate those that you're trying to reach out to. So, as I would tell my children or my friends, before you strike out, be very aware that you may cause irreversible damage in a direction you don't intend, especially even though it's against a target that you see as your enemy. It very rarely turns into a more peaceful effort. So
I'm going to read you a quote that you've probably heard, and then a reaction to it. So Mohandas Gandhi says, we are constantly being astonished at the amazing discoveries in the field of violence, but I maintain that far more undreamt of and seemingly impossible discoveries will be made in the field of nonviolence. Can you think of any innovations in the field of nonviolence or any things out there in the world, kind of the field of peacemaking, that give you hope for a more peaceful world?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I encounter hope for a more peaceful world, and that real innovation of nonviolence, you know, almost all the time, you know, in the activist community. You know, you're working on a campaign to really transfer power from your enemy to yourself, or to the community, to the social work that you're doing. And even the small victories in that effort is huge, because it transcends all the work that you're doing. When you look at the lunch counters in the civil rights movement, those brave people who did those actions, who sat at the lunch counter when they weren't supposed to, you know, they were beaten and they were put in jail, and, you know, many people in that movement were killed. And it was such an obvious injustice that they exposed by their actions, that they unified almost all of America to back them in their efforts. And when you're confronted by that much real lack of ethics and moral quality, even by your superior, you'll see that it really will galvanize the country, and it'll make that one issue exposed, and things will turn. And I think that's what we saw in India in Gandhi's movement, that you had a small amount of British soldiers that could not possibly enforce law or their laws in that country, when a huge movement was starting to support Gandhi. And before it became radically violent, they were forced to withdraw.
Right.
And, you know, I think if you can create an action in a campaign that really does expose that, then yeah, it's going to be innovative, and you're going to see breakthroughs, and people are going to always back what's right.
One line in the song that makes me think of is, they say we're too yellow-bellied, we say we're the new superpower. You agree with that?
Well, the thing about, I think, the White Flag Warrior is we're not looking at a soldier in a nationalistic sense. This is a movement that can be felt across borders and boundaries. This is a movement that can be felt across class systems, across race and color of skin. You know, it's something that everybody can share, no matter where they are. If they're a victim of violence and oppression, that, you know, it can be shared. So it's going to be unified, whether you're in Iran fighting for democracy, or, you know, Tibet, you know, or in the streets of America. It's going to be shared and felt. So it's much more bigger than, you know, one person, one warrior, one nation. You know, it's shared universally.
Are you a White Flag Warrior?
Absolutely, I'm a White Flag Warrior.
Are you hopeful?
I have a lot of hope. If I didn't have hope, I wouldn't continue to struggle, and I wouldn't make sacrifices every day.
Great. Thank you so much.
Cool.
That's wonderful.
Thanks.
You.